Right now on WCNC Charlotte, the impact of hurricanes. The Carolinas are no stranger to these powerful storms.
Ahead, we'll show you what it's like inside the storm as we show you some of the most powerful hurricanes ever to hit North Carolina.
And the Charlotte area has seen that power, especially 35 years ago.
This is a very serious system that is going through Charlotte.
Tonight, I look back at being on the air as Hugo tore through the air.
Plus, our changing climate is playing its part as hurricanes become more intense. The impacts as tropical waves make their way across the Atlantic tonight.
Wind, rain, and flooding, all major impacts from hurricanes. Ahead, why you should expect to see more sights like this one in the future.
And I'll sit down one-on-one with the man nobody wants to see when a storm approaches the coast. My interview with the Weather Channel's Jim Cantore and much more right here on WCNC Charlotte. Thank you for joining us tonight. Over the next hour, we'll walk you through the science of hurricanes and hear from those who have brought you inside those storms over the decades. I'll be joined by our team of Weather Impact meteorologists sharing their insight and analysis. We're going to begin tonight, though, with a look at September and why it's the peak of hurricane season. Here's Larry Sprinkle.
This hurricane season is getting more and more active. Actually, the peak is September 10th. September, the month, has 40% of tropical storms and hurricanes. The next month, August, is 24% and October, 20%. So it's really August, September, and October. Those are the big months for hurricanes. The reason for September tropical cyclones, sea surface temperatures reach their actual warmest. Saharan dust is less widespread and upper level winds tend to be less intense. Some of the strongest, most powerful hurricanes of all time have hit during the month of September. For example, the Labor Day hurricane 1935 had winds 185 miles per hour. Gilbert back in 1988, winds 185. The year was 2017. Hurricane Irma had winds 180 miles an hour, and Rita back in 2005 had winds 180 miles an hour. By the way, hurricane season ends November 30th.
With the peak of the hurricane season among us, let's check in with meteorologist Brittany Van Voorhees on how things are looking in the tropics tonight.
Thanks, Brad. Here's what's going on right now in the tropics. First area I want to highlight here is the spot shaded in orange. This is partially the remnants of what was previously Tropical Storm Gordon that is still continuing to churn, trying to redevelop, but even if it does, is no impact to land. One spot we are going to watch, especially over the next week or so, is the Gulf of Mexico. Right now, an area of low pressure that's nearing the Western Caribbean over the next 7 days, and then eventually moving into the Gulf, does have kind of the ingredients here. 80 degrees Fahrenheit with the water, of course, lower wind shear to potentially form. So got a lot of time to watch it. As you saw there, a low chance over the next week. Here are the hurricane names that we've had so far this year, Alberto all the way through Gordon. You may notice that the H name, Helene, is not crossed off the list. That is because the system, the tropical system that did impact the coast and bring us rain and wind earlier this week, never got a name. It was technically never a tropical depression or named storm, partially because of a lack of a warm core. Now, we could get all into the semantics of why that happened, and Chris Mulcahy does have a really nice weather IQ that is over on our website, as well as the WCNC Charlotte mobile app if you want a little bit more information on that. But while we were impacted by about 2 to 3 inches of rain in parts of the Charlotte area, of course, the immediate coast got walloped, 15 to 20 inches for places like Carolina Beach along the North Carolina coast. So a good reminder that regardless of the time of year, we have to pay attention more to the forecast and the impacts rather than when it technically gets a name or not a name. So what could happen for the rest of September and of course eventually October and November, because official hurricane season doesn't end until November 30th? Well, this time of year in September, both September and October, have most of our big hurricanes impacting the Carolinas. So we will of course watch the Caribbean, Western Caribbean, where that current low is shaded in yellow. We watch the Gulf of Mexico and also the Western Atlantic there. If you remember, Florence did come in pushing to the west. So pretty much we watch all the areas in September. Eventually October, we're more so watching the Western Caribbean and into the Eastern Atlantic. And then eventually by November, we of course only watch a small area as hurricane season quickly dwindles down.
Since the 1800s, North Carolina has taken numerous hits from hurricanes, some of the most impactful hurricanes coming this time of year. Meteorologist Chris Mulcahy looks at the records to find the state's strongest hurricanes here in North Carolina.
Since the 1800s, North Carolina has taken dozens of direct hits from hurricanes. Here are the top 5 strongest based on wind speeds. Number 5, Hurricane Fran, September 1996. Hurricane Fran is the only major hurricane to make landfall in North Carolina in the past 60 years. It produced maximum sustained winds at 115 miles per hour at landfall in Cape Fear and even stronger wind gusts. Number 4, Hurricane San Ciriaco, August 1899. It gets its name because it first hit Puerto Rico during the Catholic Festival. It made landfall days later on Ocracoke Island with estimated wind gusts ranging from 120 to 140 miles per hour. This storm knocked out bridges in the Outer Banks and wrecked ships off the coast, adding to the legendary graveyard of the Atlantic. Number 3, the Great Beaufort Hurricane, August 1879. This Category 3 storm snuck up on the Carolinas Crystal Coast. The eye's landfall in Beaufort, North Carolina even caught the governor off guard. Wind gusts reached at least 138 miles per hour at Cape Lookout before the anemometer was blown away. Number 2, Hurricane Helene, September 1958. Hurricane Helene could have been number 1, but the strongest winds around the eye narrowly missed the coast by just 20 miles. The National Weather Service in Wilmington still recorded gusts up to 135 miles per hour, and the Coast Guard station at Cape Lookout measured gusts up to 144 miles per hour. Number 1, Hurricane Hazel, October 1954. Hurricane Hazel wins the top spot for the strongest known landfalling hurricane in North Carolina history. Hazel's eye came ashore in North Carolina and South Carolina border, creating devastating damage. Hitting at the same time as high tide, Hazel's storm surge was up to 18 feet high in Calabash. Hurricane-force winds were recorded in Raleigh and Fayetteville, and an estimated 1/3 of all buildings east of Charlotte were damaged. North Carolina has never seen a Category 5 hurricane, and let's hope it stays that way. I'm meteorologist Chris Mulcahy with WCNC Charlotte.
Any direct hit from a hurricane is impactful, but not all sides of the storm are created equal. Meteorologist KJ Jacobs explains why.
The dirty side of a storm refers to an area of a hurricane or tropical system where you will find the highest winds, highest storm surge, and greatest tornado threat. So what side of the storm is that? Well, generally, it's the northeast side of the storm, or simply put, the right side of the storm. But it also depends on which direction the storm is moving. If it's traveling in the northern direction, the dirty side will be more on the direct right-hand or eastern side. If the storm is traveling in a more westerly direction, the dirty side will be more on top of it or the northern side. So what makes it so dirty? It's all about the wind direction and a little math. For example, if a storm is moving north at 30 miles per hour and has wind speeds of 100 miles an hour, then the storm will produce winds of 130 miles an hour on the right, dirty side. While on the left side, winds move in the opposite direction of the storm's movement, so they'll be much slower at 70 miles an hour. However, it's important to remember as the storm grows stronger, every side becomes dangerous. I'm meteorologist KJ Jacobs, WCNC Charlotte.
The coast is not the only place where flooding is a threat from hurricanes. Thanks to a warming climate, flooding from excessive rainfall is an increasing problem here in Charlotte as well. That's why I spoke with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Stormwater Services to learn how they handle floodwaters around our city. If it seems like we get feast or famine in the rainfall department here in the Carolinas, you'd be correct. But increasingly, we are seeing record rainfall rates and more extreme rainfall events in this warming climate. As the atmosphere warms by 1 degree Fahrenheit, it can roughly hold 4% more water. So the process works like this. Colder air is like this black bucket. It holds less water than warmer air. The colder air holds water, but look how much. And the red bucket is like warmer air. It holds way more water. But it's just not the warm air. As Dr. Lackman at NC State University says, there's other factors involved.
They really depend on the amount of water vapor and the strength of the updraft, the strength at which the air is rising, the speed at which it rises. And those things are actually connected, because one of the things that forces the updraft, that fuels the updraft, is the release of heat by condensing water vapor. So those two things are tied.
Which is a huge problem in a place like Charlotte, which is already a flash flood prone city. Now, our topography, our numerous creeks, along with our rapid growth and development, all leads to a lot of flash flooding. So when you couple all of that with a warming climate, our flash flood threat increases. But we are doing something about it in Charlotte. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Stormwater Services is the agency responsible for surface water here in the city and the county.
We're improving infrastructure. You know, you have the old infrastructure with a pipe this big, when we're putting in pipes this big, you know, to get that water to flow a lot better. In our creeks, that's natural infrastructure. That's Mother Nature's way of moving water. Well, we're making those wider, and so we're clearing out some of the debris. And then we're also trying to get houses out of the way.
The real question is, how much more will we have to do with our infrastructure and the floodplains to prevent increasing flooding with these heavy rainfall events? One thing is for sure, even if you're not in a floodplain, you should consider flood insurance. As one FEMA official said to me, if you live where it rains, you should consider flood insurance. An increasing urban flood threat is just one of the several impacts being increased by climate change. Coming up after the break, I'll talk with Brittany to explain how rising sea surface temperatures are impacting the creation of future storms. Welcome back, everybody. Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich here, joined by meteorologist Brittany Van Voorhees. And we know climate change is a big story in all of weather, but when it comes to tropical meteorology and hurricanes, the thing about climate change isn't that there could be less storms in a warming climate because of wind shear, but there are other factors in play, right, Brittany?
Yes, so a big thing here when it comes to wind shear is that storms in the Atlantic Basin, you know, tropical cyclones, hurricanes, and tropical storms, they're horizontal, you know, so they're moving across because of steering currents. But with vertical wind shear, like we see during severe weather season, that the storms love when they're trying to rise and create tornadoes, it has the opposite effect with hurricanes. It rips them apart and kind of disrupts them the same way that moving over land does. However, that's going to be overcome by all the other factors, such as sea level rise and, of course, more moisture in the atmosphere, meaning more rainfall. So how does that kind of impact people, Brad?
Yeah, the warmer the climate, we know we have more water vapor. So one of the things that we're going to see in a warming climate is when these storms do form, they're going to have more rainfall in them. And we've seen this a lot in some of the systems we've seen in the Carolinas. Think of Florence and Matthew. They're slower moving, and most studies show anywhere from 10 to 20% more water in these storms when they move inland. So the flood threat could increase tremendously. And that's freshwater flooding, not storm surge. But storm surge could be enhanced as well by sea level rise. And it's just not about rising sea levels. There's something else going on in the water as well, right?
Yes, so the water itself, as it gets warmer, it continues to expand. So the same way that someone's home, maybe, let's say along the coast, is 2 feet above sea level. And let's say that storm that comes by causes 4 feet of sea level, you know, of storm surge as it comes in. Well, they're impacted by 2 feet of storm surge. However, if sea level rises by 2, now that same home is at sea level now. And so the same storm that previously impacted them with 2 feet of storm surge, now we're talking 4 feet. Now that's kind of minimal when it comes to hurricanes along the Carolina coast. But so you think of storms like Ian in Southwest Florida that had 18 feet of storm surge. Some people that weren't impacted before can be impacted now. And the expansion, because the water's getting warmer, I feel like is the biggest thing that people, you know, don't talk about enough when it comes to the water expansion. But the second thing is we know melting ice caps do have an impact there as well.
Yeah, and when you're talking about flooding your home, every inch of water matters because some of these homes were built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s for storm surge during that time frame. Now, 2024 and beyond, we've got to build for these storm surges that are going to be several inches, in some cases several feet higher. Now, climate change plays a big part in something else. We call it rapid intensification. We've talked about it already, and rapid intensification is happening more frequently.
Yeah, so the warm, moist air from the ocean essentially gets pulled into the storm, and that allows for it to get stronger quicker, about 35 miles per hour in 24 hours or less. However, a lot of the rapid intensification we've seen has been even more than that. Yeah. And I think it's also important to know that the amount of storms that rapidly intensify in the period between about 2000 to about 2020 comparative to 1970 to about 1990, it doubled in this decade period. So, we sometimes talk about it more, feel like we talk about it more because, the satellite era. I feel like that's when we talk about it a lot, where people say, well, there might have been more storms before. That's absolutely possible. People maybe died more often. Absolutely possible because we didn't know. But at the end of the day, when we look at the damage, you can't measure damage differently, when it comes to those factors. So I think you have to look at not just the amount of storms like we talked about, but how much stronger they are. And if the same amount of storm surge, the same hurricane is causing so much more damage than it would have 4 decades ago, it's a big deal.
And the other thing we're noticing is that rapid intensification is happening closer to the coast. So, and that's always a scary thing for us as meteorologists. It's one thing to have it rapid intensification go on over open water, but what we've seen with recent storms, people go to bed and then overnight they wake up and the storm goes from a Cat 1 to a Cat 3. And it happens within that 24-hour period where if you didn't evacuate or take your storm precautions ahead of time, it might be too late. So that is something that we're seeing a lot more in a warming climate, and it's just something we'll have to track as we go further into the future with all storms that impact the Carolinas. Still to come, using AI to keep people safe during severe weather. How the National Weather Service is testing out a system to make sure you can get the info you need no matter what language you speak.
Who's ready for some tropical trivia? Here's the question. What year has the most hurricanes on record? Was it A, 2005, B, 1933, C, 1887, or D, 2020? We'll have the answer right after the break. Before the break, we asked you this question. The tropical trivia is, what year has the most hurricanes on record? Drum roll, please. If you answered 2020, you are correct. 2020, not too long ago. Yeah, and we know a lot happened during that year. But check it out as far as the rankings go. 2020 had 30 named storms. Only the second time in history that we've gone on to the Greek alphabet. We don't do that anymore. In 2005, that's the year that it beat. And 2005 was an infamous year with, you know the name, Hurricane Katrina.
Artificial intelligence is all over the place today, including the weather. And while it's helping forecast the weather, it's also helping communicate the impacts of hurricanes. The National Weather Service is saving hours translating those vital English language weather alerts, warnings, forecasts, and everything else into other languages.
Essentially, the main goal of the project is to get our weather alerts and information into the hands of people with limited English proficiency.
Chris Horbach is the meteorologist at the National Weather Service office in Columbia, South Carolina, and he's part of this project. The partnership with Lilt involves their patented AI, which learns through feedback from bilingual forecasters and translation experts. It enhances the efficiency and accuracy of those translations over time. The time it saves has been incredible. The San Juan Forecast Office used to take hundreds of hours to translate hurricane products to Spanish, but now with the Lilt,
we cut down the amount of time needed to translate these critical weather information products from about an hour to less than 10 minutes.
The project has opened doors to Spanish translations for multiple weather forecast offices, including those here in the Carolinas, benefiting a broader population. Now, future plans involve translating products into Vietnamese as well as Chinese and other languages that are offered.
One thing that's important to know is that the purpose of this experimental site is to collect feedback from the public, from users, so that we can drive expansion of this project.
This project is a significant step in leveraging AI to make weather alerts and other information more accessible and more effective, all with the goal of meeting the needs of the community. Still to come, inside the storm, scenes like this are common as hurricanes make their way over land. Ahead, we go inside a wind tunnel to show you just how strong these winds actually are.
Raising your weather IQ is now for all ages, thanks to our Weather IQ activity book. It's filled with all sorts of weather education, fun facts, games, and puzzles. So let's open it up and learn a little more. Let's start on this page with supercells. All supercells produce hail, as we saw in Rock Hill recently, that can lead to damage like this. These monster storms rotate, which makes them stronger. They produce damaging winds, heavy rain, frequent lightning, and have the highest chance of producing a tornado out of any thunderstorm. Now, lightning is one of the most common weather threats in the Carolinas, and 75% of all lightning strikes occur over 3 months, June, July, and August in North Carolina. One of the most common weather misconceptions is counting lightning. Sound takes 5 seconds to travel 1 mile. So counting 5 Mississippis isn't 5 miles away, it's actually only 1 mile away. We always talk about the sights and sounds of weather, but science can also be delicious. This page teaches you and the kids how to make homemade ice cream. There's also a coloring page that teaches you about rainbows. And we haven't seen snow for 2 years here in Charlotte, but at least you can find the word snow in this word search. And it's not just weather. We even have a page about earthquakes that has a fun crossword. So if you and the family want to raise your weather IQ and learn how to be safe and more weather aware, you can find and download this Weather IQ activity book from our website. Or you can just scan this QR code and access it on your phone. Ooh, there's a severe weather preparedness checklist.
Welcome back, everybody. Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich here with Larry Sprinkle. And Larry, you've been here a long time, and I always tell people the one benchmark for weather in this city is Hurricane Hugo. You were actually on the air for Hugo. Tell everybody who wasn't here but has heard the stories what it was like covering that storm in Charlotte.
Well, it's amazing because we'd never have a hurricane come this far inland. And watching what was going on in Charleston, South Carolina, thinking that hurricane's going to take more of a move inland.
Yeah.
It did. And so we were prepared to be on the air, and were on the air at the time. So it was early in the morning, maybe 4:30, 5 o'clock. We started getting reports of Shaw Air Force Base getting winds of 90 miles an hour. And then, I'm on the air describing the situation. And I've said, we've had wind gusts here of about 80, 85 miles an hour. And off to my left, I was facing the camera this way, I could hear a noise. I could hear this explosion in the studio. Looked over and the ceiling caved in.
Holy cow.
So what happened was a power line at the top of the tower next to the building that snapped, hit the roof, and came to the ceiling. So I'm on the air trying to describe it. And I know we have a little bit of tape on it, but what you don't see is when I say back to the news anchor, okay, back to you, Rick. And Rick goes, Larry?
You're like hunting for cover.
We'll get back to Larry. So it was crazy to have the hurricane come this far inland. And actually hit the studio at the same time.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing because I think now in 2024, most inland communities take hurricanes pretty seriously. And Charlotte for sure because of that storm. But I think what's fascinating, talk about what people's mentality about hurricanes in Charlotte was before Hugo hit. Did they even worry about them? Did they even talk about it?
Never. I mean, we covered hurricanes, obviously. If you think of the legendary hurricanes that affected the Carolinas, you go back to Hurricane Hazel, way back in the day. And people had coastal connections. But they would never, ever affect us. I mean, the spin-up tornadoes that we talk about now, no one even thought about that. So when you heard about hurricanes, it was, it's the beach. It's Wrightsville Beach, it's Myrtle Beach. Never here. So the people are just naive to that.
Yeah, and what's fascinating nowadays, we have inland hurricane warnings, tropical storm warnings. And part of that reason is because we got to warn people inland. And the thing that I think people need to take home with the Hurricane Hugo stuff is that it wasn't just rain and tornadoes like you said. There were hurricane force winds over Charlotte for an extended period of time. And one of the things you still see to this day is the tree damage, Larry. Talk about the trees during that.
We saw, I remember being kind of trapped at the station. You could not drive anywhere because thousands of trees were down in the Charlotte area. And you talk about what people's impact here was. No, it wasn't a big rain event, it was wind. Because we had hurricane force winds in Charlotte. Did so much tree damage. I'll have to say we can be thankful that there was not a major loss of life. There was one death from this, but the damage, there were people without power I was out without power for 2 weeks, up to 6 weeks with no power. Because, the trees went down on the power lines. I mean, you were trapped literally sometimes in neighborhoods and couldn't get out. So people got to know their neighbors back in those days. And, with no power, that means everything in the refrigerator was going to go bad. So people were cooking out for days. It was something that this area had never seen before, and certainly shocked to people's lives. And I think once Hugo hit, people started paying more and more attention, and obviously today, we inform people way ahead of time that we could get effects from hurricanes.
And the power outages to this day is one of the biggest outages in Duke's system until the ice storm in 2002.
That's right, exactly.
But the tree damage was so extensive that I know a lot of tree companies actually got their start during that. I remember doing a story about that, and some of them started during Hugo because there was so much work to be done. And Hugo, the name Hugo, has staying power with us, right? We've got a mascot for the Hornets named after Hugo, right?
At that time,
tell the story about this. This is interesting.
He was introduced at that time because we just got the Charlotte Hornets, and so it unfortunately coincided with this devastating hurricane.
I know.
So even I think people understood, but it was just ironic that here's this brand new NBA basketball team, brand new mascot Hugo, and then here comes this devastating hurricane that just pours into the area.
And even though that storm was probably the biggest in our city's history, we always tell people, every storm we get, people ask, is it another Hugo? The thing I will tell you, and I say this to everybody, every storm is different. There will never be another Hugo. There will be storms that could be worse than Hugo or not as bad as Hugo. So it's always important to take every storm seriously, and every storm treat it differently, Larry. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It was crazy times, and you know, that's why we're in this building we're in now, because that building was almost demolished. From
yeah. For WCNC, that storm has a huge impact on this station's legacy.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hurricane hunters provide a lot of information about a storm, but how are they even getting inside? They're flying a plane called a WC-130J, like this one. It's a modified version of a C-130 plane that you might see dropping the red stuff on a fire out west. These planes are tough. They can fly for longer periods of time, and they can really take a beating. These airborne science missions are run by the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, which has been flying into storms since 1944. In the cargo section of the plane, there are 2 different pallets of computer systems that take all of the data from the sensors on the plane's exterior and help determine what's going on inside the storm. Now, the hunters also drop this parachute-type sensor called dropsondes, which float through the storm, relaying information about the storm's pressure, wind speed, and direction. That information all comes together, gets processed, and is then shared through the National Hurricane Center for all of us to share with you. The hurricane hunters provide crucial information. We really can't forecast these very well without their help. In 2004, I had a chance to go on a hurricane training mission with the United States Air Force Reserve. Here's a little bit of that story. These experienced hurricane hunters gather information that increases the accuracy of hurricane predictions by 30%.
Hurricane Hugo, we lost about 4,000 feet of altitude with full power.
I've seen water spouts and some moderate turbulence, but some rain coming into the aircraft, but nothing that would really scare me.
So the answer to your question, are they crazy? The answer is no. They aren't thrill seekers, just Air Force reservists doing their job, serving their country. We know winds can cause some of the strongest damage during a hurricane. Meteorologist Chris Mulcahy got a first-hand look at just how powerful those winds can be.
We're here at the Aerodyne Wind Tunnel, and what are we going to do? We're going to demonstrate the power of a hurricane's winds. We're going to go from tropical storm 1, 2, 3, and then max it out at a low end 4 at 130 miles per hour. All right, it's getting real. All right, let's experience a hurricane. This is the Aerodyne Wind Tunnel, 250 feet long, 2,500 horsepower. The main thing about this simulator, you don't have the rain, you don't have the debris. This is just showing the pure power of the winds. Okay, let's do this. This would be tropical storm strength. You can walk. Picture this as a strong thunderstorm pushing through the area. But once you get to 74 miles per hour, that's Category 1. Let's go Category 1. You can feel the difference. A Category 1 is going to rip off shingles, roof tiles. Let's go Category 2. A Category 2 hurricane is winds at 96 to 110 miles per hour. I can't walk forward on my own. Debris can be thrown into windows. I can barely speak. It's an extremely dangerous situation to be outside. Let's go major. Ramp it up to Category 3. You can feel the difference. You can feel the difference. Roofs can be blown off. Let's go to the map. This must be Category 4. Both Category 4 and 5 hurricanes produce catastrophic damage and can leave areas uninhabitable for weeks, even months. The power of wind increases exponentially. Just look what it does to my face as we increase to major hurricane status. Cute, right? Something I truly never want to experience in real life, but thanks to Aerodyne for showing us the force of a hurricane. I'm meteorologist Chris Mulcahy with WCNC Charlotte.
In a changing climate, stronger winds and rising waters. Next on WCNC Charlotte, the impact sea level rise is having on coastal flooding here in the Carolinas. Welcome back. We're seeing ice sheets, glaciers melt amid this changing climate, and that's causing sea levels to rise. The National Ocean Service projects that sea level rise along the U.S. coast will come up about a foot by 2050. As that happens, places we love along the coast start to look different. Meteorologist KJ Jacobs explains how rising tides and flooding could dramatically change our coastline.
Twice per day at the coast, we have a high tide and a low tide, but the high tides are outweighing the low tides due to an uptick in coastal flooding. Coastal Carolina communities are experiencing a weather phenomenon called high tide flooding. This occurs on sunny days without a storm in sight because of sea level rise.
High tide flooding, which would cause problem in the streets, disappearing shoreline during these extra high tides, those were quite rare just 20 years ago.
NOAA's oceanographer Dr. William Sweet says high tide flooding days are increasing.
And just last year, there were 6 of those days recorded. Next year, somewhere between 5 and 8 of those days are expected.
Sweet says with another foot of sea level rise driven by climate change, high tide flooding days could reach 100 days annually by the year 2050.
Emissions really matter. Higher emissions equals more heating, more thermal expansion of the ocean, more melting of mountain glaciers in Antarctica and Greenland, higher seas, more flooding.
Since our coastline is home to both commerce and tourism, a rising sea environment could change the landscape, resulting in billions of dollars of lost home value.
With that comes a loss of beach. Typically, in a natural environment, the beach would move inland, things would sort of readjust, the sand, the dunes, but we have stuff there. We've built cities, houses, things along the coast that's just going to interfere with the inland encroachment, let's say, of the sea.
Sweet says the first step is to plan and prepare to help protect our coastal communities most vulnerable to high tide floods. Typically, the Carolina coast sees the most flooding during the fall due to an extra foot of sea level rise that occurs naturally. It normally goes back down in the winter. However, Sweet says the trend could continue for other seasons in the future. I'm meteorologist KJ Jacobs, WCNC Charlotte.
Next on WCNC Charlotte, my one-on-one with the man you never want to see when a storm approaches the coast. My sit-down with Jim Cantore from the Weather Channel is next.
Who's ready for some more tropical trivia? The question, what letter of the hurricane alphabet has been retired the most? Is it the letter C, the letter F, the letter I, or the letter M? The answer coming up after the break. Good to see you. Welcome back. So before the break, I asked you this question. What letter of the hurricane alphabet has been retired the most? If you answered the letter I, you are correct. That's right. Whenever the letter I pops up, that's the 9th named storm of the season, we're always watching very, very carefully because look at the most recent hurricane names that began with the letter I. Ian, Ida, Irma, Ingrid, where technically it's happened 14 times if you include iota. So no other letter has been retired more than the letter I. As for number 2 in the rankings, that would be the letter F.
A few days ago, between hurricanes, I talked one-on-one with one of the most famous meteorologists in the U.S. and honestly the world, Jim Cantore. Here's part of my conversation with him. Jim, so you're kind of, you're a hurricane chaser. You've been in a lot of hurricanes. Talk a little bit what it's like to cover so many hurricanes throughout your career.
Brad, Francine was my 113th storm.
Wow.
Okay. I mean, that's depressions, storms, wannabes, and, obviously hurricanes. Been to Belize, been to Hawaii about 5 times, been to Bermuda about 3 times. So I've certainly gotten out there. It's an adventure, man. It's our Super Bowl, and you got to show up. You got to be ready to go. And at the end of the day, you got to put yourself and your team in a position to be safe and also show everybody what's really the worst of the storm.
Yeah. So of all those storms you covered, what are, I would say the worst, but maybe most memorable might be a better way to put it, that you've covered?
Well, interestingly enough, in terms of storms, Katrina with about 30 foot of storm surge in Gulfport, Mississippi, pretty much takes the cake.
Yeah.
And, it's weird that was going on and ground zero. And then you had this levee failure going on at the same time in New Orleans, which grabbed a lot of the tension. And folks in Mississippi are like, hey, what about us? I mean, we got 30 foot of storm surge in through here. So it was really a huge disaster for this country. And of course, it overwhelmed FEMA and of course, a lot of the agencies that deal with all that. So it took a minute to get a response. As far as the most interesting ones, I've never had a situation where we had to jumpstart one of our vehicles. And when we opened the hood of one of the trucks to jumpstart the vehicles, there was a snake sitting on the engine. That just happened, Brad. That just happened in Francine. So, I mean, we didn't know what that was. Copperhead, Rattler, the guy who was with us, he says, hell, it's a combination of both. And I'm like, snakes can crossbreed like that? He said, yeah, I'm from Louisiana. I know everything about snakes. Well, no, they can't, number one. And two venomous snakes do not make a non-venomous snake. So that got to be fun. I mean, that was just crazy. So that's one of the crazier things that's ever happened to me, to be honest with you.
That's pretty wild. Yeah, so you burned Francine, obviously. This season has been kind of weird. It got off to this crazy fast start.
Right.
Then there was a lull, and now things are trying to wake up. What are your thoughts about this season? Where do you think it's going to go the rest of the way through the end of November?
If somebody told me that Beryl would be our only true MDR storm at this point in the season, I'd be like, you guys are crazy. This is going to be gangbusters. We got warm water. We got La Nina coming on. And, this isn't my specialty. I don't do long range forecasting. I take them one at a time. But, that's pretty much essentially what was being said and told to us. So, yeah, I mean, it made sense. It certainly, those two features would highlight everything. But, oh my gosh, here comes the dust, which was above average. Here comes the shear. Here comes the ITCZ replacement way up to the north, right into the shear and the colder waters of the Atlantic. So we pretty much, I think, at this point, lost the MDR part of the season. So now we kind of look back closer to home to what is going to be happening there. And I'm not going to say it's a bust yet, because as you know, Brad, all it takes is one to come on up, and already the models are cranking out something for next week into the Gulf. So, who knows? Who knows what? But I think the focus from this point of the season has to go back near home into the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, especially you get these stalled fronts now that are moving down in the early fall. They just camp out over the warm water, and it's like something spins up close and you have less lead time, which is like the worst case scenario.
That is the worst case scenario. Think about it too, Brad. 6 of 8 of our cyclones this year, our systems, have been PTC, potential tropical cyclone.
Yeah.
6 of 8 of them. And that's pretty wild.
Yeah, that's
so they're
crazy.
Coming up at the last minute, right?
Yeah. Oh, and that's like a nightmare for warning and trying to get advisories out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Still to come, more with my one-on-one conversation with the Weather Channel's Jim Cantore, including what it's like to be the most feared man along the coast. We're back now with more of my one-on-one conversation with meteorologist Jim Cantore. I have to ask you this, you see this all over social media. What is it like being like the most feared man on the coast? I mean, I love the Weather Channel commercial they did years ago of you showing up. That's a classic commercial. But does that really happen in real life, and what it's like being that way when you go to the coast?
I mean, honestly, I think from that commercial, it's kind of morphed into something pretty gigantic and ridiculous almost at times, because even going down for Francine, all these different, overhead signs were like, Jim Cantore, go away. You're not welcome here. Jim, we love you, but, you're not welcome during hurricane season. I mean, all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of morphed into its own little giant, I guess to say. But you know what? Here's the deal. If it makes people prepared and gets them ready to get out of the storm's way, then that's fine. Just go ahead and tell me to get the heck out of your town. I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I feel like your SEC coaches, like when they're changing, then people are tracking planes. They're trying to find out where Jim, what airport he's flying.
Right. Where are they going to wind up?
Yeah. So you're always like in 5 different places at the same time. So thanks again for doing this, Jim. Really appreciate it. And I really do. I think you make a good point about the hurricane season. Too often we focus on the number of storms with these preseason forecasts, but it takes one in the wrong spot to make for a bad season. So let's hope we don't have another one.
And the season's not over, Brad. We could easily have a late year. The water's still warm. La Nina is supposed to come on, strong, into late September and early October. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Appreciate you, brother.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.
All right.
And a reminder, if you want to keep boosting your weather IQ, take out your phone right now and scan the QR code on your screen. It'll take you right to our Weather IQ YouTube channel. There you can like, subscribe, and get more content. Thank you for joining us for the Weather Impact Special. From all of us here at WCNC Charlotte and the Weather Impact team, I'm Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich. Have a great night.